you need to have something in the Constitution that will allow you to preserve that authority over and against a state regulatory scheme here, or something that would allow states, or I'm sorry, local communities to go over and above the state regulatory scheme if they want to.
Well, that's a significant distinction, over and against versus over and above.
Yeah.
So as I understand, maybe I misunderstand this idea, but I think that the case for state preemption of local authority with regard to the regulation of, say, the oil and gas industry is something about how it's important to have uniform regulations statewide.
Yeah.
But that doesn't say anything about the level of stringency or the level of how demanding the regulations should be, or how well they have to protect the health and safety of the citizens. And what you just said about going over and above the statewide regulations suggests that those statewide regulations might be viewed as setting kind of a minimum level, a floor, above which the individual communities might decide to go a little higher in order to make sure that the water, the air, the public health of their citizens are protected. And that would not be an inconsistency between state regulations and local regulations. So why would there be an objection to that at the state level?
This is a really important point, and I talked about this last night. It's interesting to listen to what the industry says when they talk about the distinction between state regulation and federal regulation. And their argument typically is, well, we don't want federal regulation across the board. We would rather have the states take the lead. And there's a lot of reasons why that makes sense, having different states dealing with different activities within the state. The basin characteristics are different. You have different types of operators, a different history. There are different kind of legal traditions as well. And so it does make some sense. But the argument in favor of federal environmental laws has always been creating a uniform system across the country. But in almost all of our environmental laws, with very few exceptions, the federal law sets the floor, and states are allowed to go over and above that if we want to. We think of this as kind of our basic model of cooperative federalism in the United States. And so a state like Colorado or California or Ohio or whoever could decide that they want to enact stricter air regulations, for example, and go over and above some of the standards that are established in the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act or whatever. It seems to me that you could make an argument that the state-local relationship should be treated somewhat analogously. There are differences, right? In the federal system, we have kind of a system of dual sovereignty between states and federal governments. When you go from state to local, the local governments essentially are creatures of state law. It's delegated state law in a sense. But I don't see a problem with making the argument that the state comes in and sets the floor, and then if a community wants to go over and above that, they can do that. That may undermine the uniformity for the operators, but it's not rocket science to figure out if a particular community has said, we don't want fracking, you're just not going to be able to frack there, okay? And if you want to go to a community that does want fracking, you can go there, and then the state scheme applies. So that doesn't seem like a huge inconvenience to me. And we've already got regulatory fragmentation out there at the state level, and so they're having to adjust to different state rules across the country. So I'm quite sympathetic to that model. I don't know that...
Would you call cooperative federalism?
Well, cooperative federalism is the way we talk about it when we talk about state-federal. But the idea is that the federal environmental laws set a floor. States can go above and beyond that if they want to, if their citizens decide that they would rather have stronger environmental laws in a particular area.
And so there would be an argument by analogy justifying municipalities within a state like Ohio going above a floor set by the state of Ohio.
Exactly, which is essentially what these home rule jurisdictions are trying to do.
That's right.
In Longmont, they said, we're not happy with the state oil and gas rules. We recognize that they're getting better and they're being revised on an ongoing basis, but we still don't want this activity in our jurisdiction, or another jurisdiction might say we want to heavily regulate it in certain respects with respect to setbacks and other kinds of impacts. So the argument is very analogous to a state going over and above a federal standard, a local government going over and above a state regulatory scheme. Mm-hmm. I've not heard a good argument for why that doesn't make sense and why it's not more democratic and fair in some respects.